Welcome back. Welcome to session 5th from Fragmentation to Cooperation, Regional Initiative with Global Strategy in the Middle East. Before we start, I'd like to introduce our distinguished speakers briefly. For the speaker is Professor Murat Yechintash. Professor Murat is the Director of Foreign Policy Study of SETA Foundation, is a member of the Presidential Committee on Security and Foreign Policy of Turkey. Next is Mahjoub Zawiri. Professor Mahjoub is a contemporary Middle East politics of Qatar University. Next speaker is Temel Kauti. Professor Temel is a professor of aeronautical engineer. He's also CEO and board member of Qatar Energy. Next speaker is Mohammed Isan. He's a senior professor of School of Security Study of KCL, and he is also senior visiting professor of Yale University. Our last speaker is Maria Gloria Polimeno. She is a principal research fellow of the SOAS Middle East Institute, right? Okay. Let's start from Professor Murat Yechintash. Professor, we know that the Middle East has historically been characterized by the fragmentation, ideological polarization, and external innovation. However, we are now seeing increased reference to regionalization and endogenous security dialogue. So from your perspective, what are the main drivers behind this shift, and do they reflect a structural transformation or merely tactical convergence among regional actors? What do you think?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Hello, everyone. Of course, the regionalization attempt is not a new attempt in the Middle East, but unfortunately today I see a different trajectories of the Middle East in the context of the de-regionalization because of the many different dynamics simultaneously are happening in the Middle East region, especially after the October 7, and of course the fall of Syrian regime in December the 8th was another manifestations of the new historical moment in the Middle East. So therefore, rather than seeing a new wave of regionalization, which is trying to stabilize the region in terms of security and political order, I see the collapse of regionalism because of a number of reasons. So, of course, there are different periods, especially when we look at the last 2 decades or 3 decades. But today, I think because of the different reasons, I see the collapse of regionalization or regionalism in the region. So there are many reasons. Number one, I think the lack of leadership is one of the important and critical issue in the Middle East to establish a sustainable regional order. I think this is really important from the perspective of regional diplomacy and regional understanding about the different issues. Number two is the lack of well-functioning institutions. So it's not like the region that we can easily compare the other regions in the international politics, like the European Union or the regionalism attempts in the East Asia. So in the Middle East, when you look at the regional institutions, there are a number of regional institutions like Arab Leagues and other cooperation of Islamic organizations, but they don't really work in terms of solving the regional issues. Yes, from an historical perspective, they have been playing vital role in terms of bringing common understanding to the regional issues, but in terms of solving the real practical issues of the regions, they don't really work. Of course, this is not the exception for the Middle East. When we look at the international system, there is a lack of well-functioning international institutions. So United Nations doesn't work, and other international organizations do not work also to bring a solution, sustainable and comprehensive solutions to the international issues. So the Middle East, I think, is the manifestations of the lack of global governance, the problems in the global governance in the international system. Of course, to me, one of the important or critical weakness of the Middle East in terms of improving its regionalization attempt is the lack of normative depth. So this is, of course, another manifestations of the legitimacy crisis in the international relations, in the international system, unfortunately, because of the lack of consensus, especially amongst the United Nations, especially amongst the United Nations Permanent Security Council member. So there is no consensus over the normative perception in the Middle East. This is one of the important problems. So many countries have sort of priorities in terms of improving normative aspect of the regional order, but when it comes to the reality, I think there is no consensus what kind of norm that we should have in terms of improving and calibrating the regional organizations. Of course, another factors in terms of the collapse of the regional order or the attempt of the regionalization is the aggressive nature of state behaviors. Especially, there are certain countries which do not have sort of diplomatic understanding or peaceful understanding when it comes to the problem in the region, especially Israel's aggressive nature of its offensive military doctrine and military policy and security policy is really undermining very nature of the Middle East order, which ultimately undermine the regionalization attempt in the region. Of course, when we look at the Arab uprisings or when we look at the post 2003 Iraqi invasion era, so there is also other countries in the region which have been trying to proxying the conflict. So which ultimately paved the way the emergence of the conflict nature of the regional order. Of course, when it comes to the destabilization of regionalism in the region, there is also a gap between domestic political structure and the strategic landscape in the region. So I think European Union example is an extreme and textbook example, but it cannot be applicable to the Middle East region. Of course, I am aware of this. I'm not naive in terms of comparing the European Union experience with the Middle Eastern experience in terms of establishing a regional political order, of course, but the gap between the real issues on the ground and the desired political solution, there is a huge gap. It was the reason, I think, why many commentators and experts and scholars and think tankers had a different idea just 1 hour before the October the 7th. Imagine that before the October 7th, in probably 6:30, there was an idea that the normalization has arrived in the Middle East in the context of the normalization between Houthis and Saudi Arabia and Israel and Turkey and the Iran and other Gulf countries normalization. But 1 hour later, it has collapsed, unfortunately. So why? Because there was really gap between different issues. There was a gap in terms of the Palestinian issue and the regional normalization. There was a huge gap between the normalization in Syria and the normalization attempt of the Arab countries, including Turkey's normalization with the Syrian regime. So it's another, failure for the imbalance between the perception and the realities on the ground. Of course, the final point that I want to make is about the external penetrations of the external actors into the Middle East. This is another obstacle to improve, I think, improve the regional institution or establish a regional order in the Middle East. So, the final point that I want to, make concerning the drivers, the main drivers. I think what we have been witnessing is the lack of strategic capacity of the individual countries in the region that can achieve sort of regional orders. So when we look at each individual countries in the region, they don't have strategic capacity to deliver what they really want to achieve. So I think this is another problem in the region, why the regional countries have decided to normalize the region, but unfortunately, because of all these lists that I mentioned in my speech, are another obstacle to establish a sustainable regional
Yes,
order.
Professor. In terms of Middle East regional order, we have to talk about Turkey. Turkey has promoted multilateral mechanisms such as regional summits and economic cooperation forum. So, in your analysis, do those initiatives present a coherent strategic vision, or are they, reactive tools for managing immediate geopolitical, risks?
I think, yes, it's at the same time as a coherent strategic vision when we look at the Turkish foreign policy towards the region. I think there is sort of continuity, especially in the post-2002 strategic landscape and the changing dynamics of Turkish foreign policy. I see a strong strategic consistency in terms of how Turkey has been perceiving the strategic landscape in the region, but at the same time, you have to accept that there is also a reactionary understanding within Turkish strategic community concerning the instabilities or the waves of insecurity in the region. So when we look at the last 2 decades, especially, of course, it was a dramatic change in Turkish foreign policy concerning the Middle East. Turkish strategic community and decision makers, I think, has constructed a naive image about the Middle East, and they try to establish an economy-oriented, economy-first foreign policy until the Arab uprising. But after the Arab uprising, because of number of reasons, especially the decline of state sovereignty, the proliferation of non-state armed actors across the region, and the defunctioning of the borders, and of course the improving and the proliferation of different subnational identity groups in different countries, from Libya to Yemen, from Maghreb to Mashrib. So therefore, Turkey, of course, had to change its orientation in terms of embracing security-oriented foreign policy to manage the geopolitical risk and to avoid the spillover effect of the crisis in the Middle East. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that Turkey's foreign policy is shifting from its original idea regarding establishing a sustainable regional order in the Middle East. In 2002, after maybe Iraqi invasion, the main objective was to establish a sustainable regional order in the Middle East. And Turkey really wanted to integrate Middle East into the international system. So there were many rock countries, according to international system, including Syria, Iran, and in Iraq. But Turkey's main objective was to integrate the Middle East as a geopolitical region to the international system. Still, I think Turkey's objective is similar, is same, but there are new dynamics that Turkey, I think, has to reconsider its overall strategic calculation. Maybe, we had sort of optimism after the fall of Assad regime in Syria regarding the consensus amongst the regional actors that the many regional countries should support the new Syria, should support the reconstruction process in Syria. But unfortunately, after the Israeli aggression and offensive against Iran, now I think every countries in the region have to recalculate their strategic objective. There is no balance of power in the region, because balance of power should rely really on the deterrence, but there is no deterrence of any other countries except Turkey, maybe except Egypt. First of all, I think how the regional countries will recalibrate their position to regain their deterrence or re-establish the balance of power in the region. But unfortunately, the Israel and maybe United States, I mean, since yesterday we have been discussing that the Israel and the United States are quest to establish a strategic dominance rather than establishing a balance of power in the region. Now there is a $1 billion question in the region amongst the regional actors, except Israel, that how they're going to re-establish the balance of power in the region if Israel is going to be successful in terms of undermining the real state capacity of Iran, maybe the regime change in Iran. So we don't know what kind of region is going to emerge after this military escalation between Israel and Iran. So Turkish, I think, geopolitical interest and its strategic priorities, I think, will change and transform accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for that insightful analysis on the structural drivers of the regionalization and Turkey's strategic posture. You have highlighted the delicate balance between long-term vision and, strategic maneuvering. This brings us to the dynamics within the Gulf. So, Professor Zubriri, your work often focuses on Gulf dynamics and the intersection between domestic reform and foreign policy. In light of recent regional normalizations such as Saudi-Iran rapprochement and Abraham Accords, are we seeing a new strategic culture emerging in the Middle East, or do those developments remain fragile, shaped by transactional interests than by long-term alignment? What do you think?
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the organizer. Assalamu alaikum jami'an. I think let's start with the moment. Where are we now so we can get to where we were? We are in a moment now where there is a war declared by a state on a state with a narrative that they have a nuclear weapon. No enough evidence. There is one statement from Atomic Energy, there is no collaboration. And a war now is going on, a destruction is going on in both sides, and instability is going on in the region. I call this a moment, the Israelization of the region. This is the moment where Netanyahu wants to make the region under the order of the Israelis, rather than the Americans. Abraham Accord, and before that, the peace process started in 1991, was an opportunity to Israel to be part of the region. They have 2 peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan. None of this have succeeded. An Egyptian, if he travels to Israel, he will be questioned from the security. 20,000 Jordanians travel to Israel, and most of them officials. So where is the peace? Israel wants to lead, to control, and the others should say yes. What we are witnessing now is a reflection of a lack of leadership globally. The United States is no longer the United States. United States used to form coalitions over the phone. 1991, the United States formed a coalition over the phone. 34 countries went to wage war in Iraq. In 2001, another coalition over the phone, 74 countries under what's so-called war on terror. 2003, similar to 60 countries over the phone, they want war in Iraq. The United States has announced 2016 that they are leading the world from behind. So there is no leadership in the world today, neither in Europe, nor in the United States, nor in the region. There is very clear scene that who has the power, who has the weapon, can set the scene. That's what we have witnessed. Arab uprising was an opportunity to Arab nations to move beyond the authoritarian regimes. The United States, the Europeans, even Iran were against Arab uprising. They support Egypt to go to the military control. They made Syria platform to Iran. Libya, as you see. They made Arab uprising, rather than opportunity, to be a crisis which leads to emerging more crises. Non-state actors have empowered in the region in the last 40 years. Within the scene, there is an emerging of failed state. Gulf region, the 6 states, they were not far away from this. 2014 and 17, a crisis within the GCC, which lasted in 2014, 6 months, and 2014 for nearly 3 years, until the Ula agreement where they normalize the relations. Why these crises happened? Because of dynamic in the region. Because countries, they have different reading of the dynamics. And the time where Qatar says Arab uprising is the right for people to look for, to move beyond authoritarian regimes, there are other countries who believe that this is not the time for that. The time where people, they think political Islam is part of the social fabric and social and cultural fabric of Arab nation, there are other Gulf states who think that is a threat to them. So these differences create a dynamic which evolving until now. In the time where some of countries, they think Iran is part of the political fabric of the region and Iran should be involved on region, should be listened to, and should be also maintain sort of a communication with Iran. There are other countries who in some stage wanted Iran to be bombed. This has been changed. In the last 2 years, there were a shift, a normalization between Iran and most of the Arab Gulf states. Iran has been defeated on the 8th of December 2024. And those who knows history, what happened in December 2024 reminds me of Chaldiran battle where Ottomans defeated Safavids. History repeats itself. Which basically put Iran behind its border. For the first time since 1998, Iran is defending itself within its borders. Iran witnessed two what so-called forced wars. One, Iraq, because Iranians believe that Iraq waged war on them. And this is the second war Israelis basically declare war on them. And both wars, they are for the first time defending themselves within their borders. This is a dynamic will lead to serious changes on the region. Number one, in the time we see the weakness of the non-state actors, we are witnessing the increasing number of failed states. And that is the environment for terrorism and instability. In the time we are seeing a serious Israeli agenda to the region with no serious counter agenda, there will be a serious conflicts in the region. One of the outcomes is the the increasing number of authoritarian regimes. To tackle the Israelization of the region, those authoritarian governments, they will oppress their people who are against that. 2 years war on Gaza, Israelis wanted to finish it in 2 weeks. Now more than 2 years, killed more than 70,000 people, injured more than 120,000 people. The world watched all of this, and none of the European nation, none of the American officials came to say this war should stop. They still believe the victim is Israel. In the region, there is a weakness now, there is no doubt. Because there is a poverty, there is oppression. There is an image presented that what Israel is doing is accepted. It's because of Islamists, or because of this, or because of Iran. That's not true. The region, the people of whether they are Arabs or non-Arabs, they reject oppression. Turkish, Iranians, all of them, they reject oppressions. And I think looking at all of this, we have to look at, one, what is the outcome of this current war? There is a serious declaration on what will happen if Tehran is being bombed. That reminds us of 1991 when Baghdad was bombed, where Saddam Hussein was forced to send his delegation to Safwan, which is south of Iraq, and meet and accepted the American conditions, where basically left Iraq 11 years under sanctions with no flight zone until the regime collapsed in 2003. We are heading toward that scenario? That will be a serious disaster to the region. If Iran becomes a failed state, there will be no security in any neighboring country. That's a fact. We have the experience with Afghanistan. With Afghanistan more stable now, there is less drugs coming to the world. So people should understand, who are in politics, in the other side, in the north of the world, that the world is changing, and they are themselves changing. They are not capable as they used to be. They are not capable to solve a problem like Ukraine. They need $9 billion to end the oppression of Russia on Ukraine. So in the region, we have to think now, relying on the others should be revised. The others has no time for us. The others, they are weak. They economically, politically, they lost their values. Democracy does not exist as you imagine. Anyone talks about human rights and colonization after was seeing in Gaza and say there is a freedom in the other north part of the world, does not know politics, does not know value.
Professor?
I'll finish.
Okay. Professor, you mentioned middle powers in the Middle East.
Sorry?
You mentioned Iran, Saudi, Israel, but here's another question: how do you assess the role of small, actors like Qatar, UAE, and Oman for fostering, cooperative mechanism? Are those states merely mediators, or are they actively recalibrating regional geopolitics?
The role of mediators become important when there is players who are advocative for that. Oman and Qatar, they contacted Iran in the last 48 hours, and they talked to the Iranians, are you willing to sit to the negotiate? They said, how do you want us to negotiate when we are under attacks every minute? Those who started the war should be, first of all, stop their war. So the mediators, even if they are willing, even if they want to make peace, where are the other parties? You need someone in Washington to say, look, what you have done is enough, let's talk. The narrative should be changed. And I have to make a great emphasis on narrative. The narrative in the media that Iran has a nuclear bomb. There is no small evidence of that. Remember, Iraq is being destroyed with the same narrative. And then after 3 years, they said we lied. Can the world wait for another 3 years and say, sorry, we destroyed Iran and we were lying? The evidence was not enough. People, they don't want to learn from history. So the mediators, answering your question, they are doing something, but this kind of effort cannot succeed if there is no support from the others. There's Europeans, they try their best, I think last night, to communicate with the Iranian foreign minister, did not succeed because of security reasons. But the Americans, they don't listen to them. Trump basically believed, and he grabbed the narrative of Netanyahu that there is a nuclear bomb there. And if he delays, they will bomb Israel tomorrow. I think we are moving toward a very critical situation. I'll finish with that. We are moving to a very critical situation. Countries like Turkey, countries like Islamic countries in Asia, they are far geographically, but they have to wake up to the fact that what's happening is including them. Pakistan, the project of Netanyahu is beyond Iran. And the Israelization of the region, it means basically people, they will not enjoy even their wealth they have. Their wealth will not be even controlled by themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Zuri. You have painted a complex picture of Gulf states and Middle East states. This internal calibration is not just about diplomatic. It's also tied to economic and technological ambitions. So this leads us to Dr. Taimur Koti.
Yes.
So, Doctor, as a figure with deep experience in aerospace and the defense industries, I'd like to ask, how do indigenous technological initiatives contribute to the regional self-reliance and interstate cooperation in the Middle East? And do defense industry partnerships act as a unifier or divider in an already fragmented region?
Okay. May I start with the anecdote? Okay. In the 91, I was a student in the University of Michigan. On the February, I entered the lab. I went to the early morning to the lab. We're doing the mechanical testing. My PhD is from there. When I entered the corridors, I see the posters. Saddam slaughtering the women in the Kuwait. and the noontime or evenings, there was the Gulf War. And we watch everything on the TVs, you know, and the high techs, the low visible aircraft, you know, and the pointed the laser guided missile and so on. That time, that was something actually. And sorry, talking as an engineer, and the Iraq failed very quickly, if I'm not making a mistake. When we're expecting, you know, as a like engineer, maybe he can sustain some. But today, everything changed. Unfortunately, I believe this way, hopefully I am not correct, we enter a war, we will continue 100 years. Iran, I know a little bit, as a Turkish Airlines CEO, I visit them several times, we do business together. And also the Turkish Aerospace as a defense company. So I know them a little bit as my own business. And the Israel, I believe they have no chance he can start land operation in Iran. Anybody in room believe that the Israel could start land operation in Iran? If it's no, this war will continue 100 years, believe me. Because with the attack of Israel, and Iranians lose some important people. It's pain. It's pain to the youngs. It's pain to the kids, you know. Never Iranian forget what happened about 5-6 days back. And if the country is the fighting through the air, this is my expert on it. I can talk about this one. This is why maybe you invite me here. Thank you for the invitation. And air to air, the war, today, Iran or other countries could easily reach the speed of sound maybe 6, 7, 20 times. It's about 20 kilometers per hour with the ramjet technologies, which so many countries have these technologies. I'm not going to detail. When they have it, they prove it. If your missile is flying about 20 kilometers per hour, nobody could stop it. Today, existing technology, radar technology, I'm expert. No way you can stop it. I'm trying to make, like the country like Iran, how many could produce? Limitless. I know how much difficult it is, how expensive it is, you know. I used to work on the defense in the past. So, and through this way, I don't know, it looks totally crazy to me. Why Israel attacking Iran this way? Doesn't make zero sense in the mind. Because you cannot win. They keep continue. Because building this kind of missile is not difficult. I don't think they have shortage in the material, in a shortage in the electronics. I don't think so. I don't have detail. I don't know the Iranian defense industry. I know Turkey. But it doesn't look difficult. So, if you go to the back on the Falkland War, between the UK and the Argentine, if you go to the war and the Iraqi issues on the 91, if you go to the war, Ukraine-Russia issues, what we're seeing is actually, with the new emerging technologies, countries could defend themselves very easily. And this is what Iran will do. Size matter, you know. Counter size matter here. I don't think Israel will sustain what they are doing. I don't think this pain will go away from the Iran. I believe hopefully, but this is what I'm thinking, you know. I could be wrong. And coming back again, what happened in the 5-6 days back, unfortunately triggered big war.
Yes.
hopefully no other nation will be a part of it. And it will be between two. Hopefully they will be end. Killing the people is not a nice thing, you know. And hopefully they will pull out. They say, sorry, we do something. Israel says, sorry, I do something wrong. And they will do it again. I know Middle East from the University of Michigan. I was a student there from 2085 to 91. And there was a scholar, I don't know, you know them, Ali Marzuri, Professor Ali Marzuri. He was very famous. He passed away. And he's Kenyan origin, a big guy. And has the books of African and so many things, and military, Middle East expert. I listen them because we're the same school. Later on, he moved State University, New York, and Binghamton. So they are my son is studying, so I know from there. And if you please go to the internet, listen their speeches, you know. They're talking about Israel, what is about this one. It's better to listen from them. But what happened a couple days back is awful. I pray to God, Allah, that will be solved, you know, peacefully. But believe me, this is not 91. This is 2025. And every single nation in this earth is more capable compared to 91. Superpower is okay, superpower. Superpower against the superpower makes sense. But superpower against the small, Iran is not a small country. Huh? And it's a different story. And hopefully this will stop. But my understanding is if the Israel continue this way, this will last 100 years and cause big life in the both sides. Hopefully it's not become the worldwide war. Sorry. That's what I'm thinking.
But another question is
Yeah.
about what's the role of Turkey in the technology rivalry, especially, you know, drone, you know, production, jet production, etc.
Yeah, I can talk about the Turkish technical capabilities, but Turkish, the foreign cafe involved here, I cannot make comment on it because I'm not there. And the Kaan, my previous company, is a fifth generation fighter. My president said a couple of days back, we signed a contract with Indonesia, about 15 billion US, as a fifth generation fighter. And the actual project start 2017, signature 2016. I was on the company that time. And the first flight complete about 2 years back, and delivery is the 2028, is fifth generation fighter. Anybody maybe know the Chinese G20, the Russian Su-65 Pakva, and American F-22 or F-35 is better than F-35, and Turkish Kaan. And it's about 5 years. It's possible. World change is not 91. Today, even with the artificial intelligence, things became like a joke, you know, sorry. I asked the artificial intelligence in the internet, could you make the resume for me? He making better than I can do it. Sorry, you know, I'm not good, you know.
Thank you, Dr.
Sorry.
Kofi, for providing a fascinating perspective on how technology and industry can be both a bridge and a battleground. This raises a fundamental question about how cooperation works on the ground, especially in political complex areas. So, Professor Ihsan, Iraq, you know, and especially the Kurdish region has long occupied a complex place within the regional power balance. In your view, how do sub-state entities such as KRG contribute or complicate the emergence of cooperative frameworks in the region?
Thank you. Thank you for the university, and thank you for Professor Salju for inviting us. And I'm so glad to participate in such a hot panel. I heard a lot of things, and I have different point of view, by the way, but I'm going to make it by the end. Iraq is not is not in a position to make any decision regarding this war or what's going on in the region, unfortunately. Seriously, because I hope that, because originally I'm Iraqi, and Iraqi Kurds, and I hope we will be in better position because of the complicated of mistakes, not after 2003, even before 2003. Professor, he said that in 1991, at his university, Michigan University, they were putting Saddam Hussein slaughtering people in Kuwait. Yes, he was doing that. American, they use that concept that he's holding weapon of mass destruction. They didn't find it because he hid it, but he had the mentality of mass destruction. The same concept today, as the professor said, it exists regard in Israelis' mentality. They say that is, if Iran's holding nuclear weapons or not holding nuclear weapons, but the mentality of mass destruction is in their mind. This is their justification. This is my analysis. I'm academic more than becoming a politician, seriously, as we said. Iraq is not in that position, but I think Iraq's will obliged by the end, by the Iranian pressure to use their proxies. Because 2 days ago, rockets will launch it in Israel from Iraqi land. I think it's not going to be accepted this way by Israelis. As a doctor mentioned that is from the airspace, there is no balance of power because Iraq space is open to everybody. Who is controlling it? American. If they say yes, go a green light, go ahead. There will be no stop line for Israelis to use that one. We mentioned a lot of things today in this panel. To Professor Murad, Professor, the idea of regionalization in this area, and not just in the area, even in Europe is felt.
Yeah.
Seriously. I was teaching in Costa Rica at University for Peace. I was imagining that Mexico is controlling all Central America. It was not true. I find out now that the differences between Costa Rica and Mexico and Panama is much, much bigger than difference between Panama and United States. And the reason is lack of leadership, and I find out there is all these regions, all these states, when they are talking about cooperation or regional cooperation, they never think about win-win game. Turkey, they wants to establish an organization area to control others. This is what exists in the others' minds. In GCC, Saudi Arabia, they were thinking of GCC. Now they find out the biggest competition. It was between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Emirates today will say, why you became my leaders? Why you are going to be the only regional superpower? The same things exist in ASEAN as well. This is why the idea of regionalization, it has different interpretation. Why? For me personally, after Corona, it was a biggest shift in the strategic mentality of all state or strategists. People started to think, okay, I'm the threat, I will be back to my national identity. And some areas, merely because the title of your panel is Fragmentation, I think we are living in the most fragmented area in the world, mainly Middle East. We are fragmented nationally inside our states. We are fragmented within our own religion. Look at the difference between Sunnis and Shias. I was never ever aware that it reached to such level. You are not touching it, you're not aware of it in Turkey, but if you live in Iraq, or if you live in Iran, or if you live in Bahrain, you can immediately find out how this society is fragmented. And at the same time, people, they talk about liberal issues. We are living in a great state, everything, which is not true. Academically, my just analysis for it, we became too realist. Such discussion, I think it was not acceptable in 1992 until 2001. The majority of us were talking about liberal values. Everywhere should be democratic. We are living in paradise. Life is so happy. We have no problems. But now, after 2003 and today, we find out the reality is not like that. really. Our dreams has been changed. Our vision for the futures has been changed. Our strategic planning has been changed, as individuals and as states. We talked about normalization of the relation in the area. There is different interpretation about normalization. What we mean by normalization, okay? People, they think about normalization between Arab and Israel. Israel, they want Arab to go their way. In Middle East, we have the concept, either my way or highway. We are using American typical concept. Either you're going to, even in the difference between religions, by the way, either you're going to live the way I like it, or go away your way. We are Muslim, we want other religions to live the way we want. I am Sunni, I want Shias to live my way. Shias wants to live other. Kurds, they want Arabs to live their ways. Turks, they want Kurds to live their ways. This is totally, we don't accept each other as we are. This is why we have totally different interpretation about normalization. We have to accept what normalization means. Normalization means each one of us should live normally, should live as a partner, should live as a share for the future. We have a lot of things to be together. And Doctor mentioned about Iran's, this is the first time Iran's touching, the war is in Iranian land. About this conflict, I was reading history a lot, really. Whenever war started to enter Iranians' land, their approach for the future started to change. I can give you a couple of examples of that.
Professor, we know that you have been involved both, academic and the political process experience. Based on that double perspective, what mechanism would be required to move from, ad hoc coordination to institutionalized regional cooperation or in the Middle East?
That's a big problem. When you are academic, you become back to politics. Unfortunately, I was politics coming back to academia, which is much, much harder because politicians, they have mindset that is totally different. I find out really is different. It's not easy to make institutions to build in that mentality. I will come back to you. I find out when the great Alexander, he started to engage himself in a war with Persian Empire. They reached Erbil, the capital of Kurdistan region today. Persian at that time, they have 12,000 fighters. Great Alexander, he had 2,000 fighters, but they were well trained, well operated, with techniques, with technology at that time. They managed to kill Quraysh, the empire. What Iranian did at that time, they told them stop. Their nobles came back to Erbil, told him that we accept your role, we are going to be part of your empire, but please never invade our land. And the daughter of great Cornish should be your wife, as a sign for peace and stability. And another incident on that, also when Islam arrived to Madain, near to Baghdad, okay? When they find out they are going to lose the war, okay? Noshirwan, he said, the noble killed, the Iranian noble, they sent the noble people, the high-class people, please, we can be part of Islamic world, and this is the daughter of our great leader, should be your wife. They married their great daughter to Hussein bin Imam Ali, alayhi salatu wasalam. Then Shi'ism started in Iran. I think this time, if the war, Professor, the war today is not to occupy lands. Israel will never ever manage to occupy any land in the world. If they want to occupy Lebanon, they can do it in 2 hours. Believe me, I'm expert in military, I'm teaching at security studies department, I know what they have. But they will never ever manage to control or to maintain security of that part for 1 day. Never. Their military doctrine is deterrent. They want to make you weak, that I can be safe, and I know how to implement my project. I agree with the professor here. The balance of power is going to be changed totally after this war. Nothing will remain as it is, be sure. And no one is going to be safe. If Iran wins the war, it will be disaster. We are going to lose the communicate. And if Israel wins the war, also is going to be disaster. They are going to implement their vision and they're implementing. No one will be safe. But based on my experience, no. Dealing with Israel as a state is going to be easier than Iranian if they win the war. Because their way of hegemony that we find out they're managing in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, how they created in Bahrain. Israel, you can tell them, no, I don't deal with you. And I agree with the professor also. This war already has been there for 40 years, by the way. And it's going to be there even in the future, even if regime changed in Iran. Because look, Iranian-Israeli relations, Iran was among the first country who acknowledged and accepted Israel as a state in 1950. And they had great relations together. And even today, one of the biggest communities in Tehran is the Jewish community. And they are still very powerful. In 1979, they changed their approach totally. They became anti-Semitism, anti-Israel. During the war, Israel was helping Iran and helping Iraq at the same time because for their commercial and business-wise. We are heading very complicated, the consequences, because I've always said there is no good war and bad peace. Never. But peace and the role of mediation started at a certain time. You cannot talk about the peace. And any initiative of any role in mediators, no one can mediate between any conflict without interest. Never ever think, as no lawyer can enter the court without getting his own cost. Cost, it doesn't mean to be, even if he do it free as an NGO, but he has something else at his back as well. The role of mediator is still, it's very complicated and late. But who can mediate? The mediator should be respectful by both sides and not be part of the conflict. For me, I think so far it's so hard to find out if the situation continue like that. We are not winning the war, stopping the war, or at least postponing to another 5 years. If nothing can, because Israel's mentality is not going to be changed at all. They have Netanyahu, and the regime cannot be filled. They are going to have another 100 Netanyahu, but because the leftist is rightist is too hard there. And if the regime changed in Tehran as well, due to the war, directly or indirectly, the mentality will stay there, as the professor said, because the damage and the consequences of the war is too high. Still, Iraqis cannot forget what America did to their country. Although the majority of us at that time, we were pro-war. We want just to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Okay? But now, a lot of people, they sympathize with that. Why? Because what happened after that, and the people who are running the show, running the country, they were worse than Saddam Hussein. This is what's been in their mentality, not in my mentality, but this is the way what people think. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ihsan. Your insights from ground level show us the internal complexities. So now move to Dr. Maria. Here's the question. How is Egypt Industrial and Development Program redefining greater power competition? What game is Egypt playing in balancing with Russia, despite being a historical U.S. ally? And what does it mean for Egypt?
Thanks for having me as the first thing. And what I want to do is actually bring a new dimension to the debate. We talk about Iran, Israel, the Levant, the Mashrek, but I want to also expand to the Maghreb area, if you don't mind, and trying to conceptualize and understand what's going on in the area from a perspective of not just Egypt, because what I'm going to argue will go beyond Egypt. It's something that expands to other North African countries. But from the perspective of Russia, and then how the country, how Egypt is navigating great power competitions, and how Russia and China are playing, in favor of the area in opposition to the U.S., which is at the moment it seems is more interested in kind of interest in reshaping alliances, the balance of power in the Levant, principally after the recent visit of Trump to the region, to the Masharek area. What I feel to say is that Egypt is supporting, is favoring this rebalance of power in North Africa, which is taking place in favor of Russia and China from different perspectives, not just political, but principally commercial and economic. And this has been accelerated after the war in Ukraine, which acted as a catalyst for the part of the region. This is taking place across three main sectors, I must say, and some degrees of success in the war is going on, in the sense that since Abdel Fattah Sisi seized power in 2013 and then it was officially elected in 2014, Cairo-Washington DC relationships underwent some kind of deterioration, if you want it or not. Not completely frozen, but certainly, more distant to some extent. Egypt and the governments and the authorities look at Russia to support the ambitions behind Egypt 2030. And this idea of modernizing the country, the idea of reorganizing the entire industrial machine of the country in favor of the SDGs, in favor of development, in favor of how nature is going to be institutionalized, reorganized in the political materiality of the country. And Russia is supporting this kind of discourse in one way or another, if you want it or not. So this access, as I said, is threefold organized. When you look at industries, you look at trades, you see that, just to give you some sense of, data, because my discourse here, my speech is trying to intersect also some economic data, if you don't mind. Russia is investing $9 billion into Egypt, and is also supporting the constructions of the Sun City in the Port Said area in north coast of Egypt. Of course, there's some mutuality of interest in what's going on and how Russia is trying to expand control over North Africa through Egypt. So, as I said just earlier, this is not something that just touch upon the country, upon Egypt. It's not something that touch upon the government per se. It's something that trying to conceptualize Egypt as a hub through which the non-Western bloc is looking at the North African markets and North African, trying to influence North African politics, if you want to or not, directly or indirectly. And Russia is, as I said, is investing $4.6 million in constructions of the Sun City in Port Said area, just as mentioned just earlier. Which says a lot also about the politics of architecture, if you want it or not. Because if you look at the model, the plan behind the Sun City, it's going to be built on two sides. One side will be named after Moscow, and the second side will be named after St. Petersburg. So you can see here how politics intertwine also architecture, and says a lot about how equilibria, how alliances, how the balance of power is transforming North African landscapes through Egypt, commercially and also economically, principally. The second level, of course, is trades and agriculture, which is something which is very important for Egypt, and not just for Egypt. What I'm going to say could be thought-provoking, but it's based on my works, based on my publications and recent books as well. Egypt has lost much of its diplomatic capacity to interfere and influence the paths of regional politics, at least historically speaking. We are no longer in the 50s. We are no longer under Gamal Abdel Nasser, I'm afraid. But its intention to regain this role in the future, and the prism through which it is taking place is certainly commercial routes. And agriculture is one of those sectors through which the country is trying to reimpose itself, not just in the region, North Africa, but also potentially in the region. I don't have crystal balls for the future, but that's the idea behind, despite the obstacles and the struggles, the challenges that the country is currently facing. And going back to agriculture, Russia is supporting the enhancement of the fertilizer sector. This is not politically immune because the fertilizer sector in Egypt is controlled by the Arab organizations for industrializations. To put it simply, the armed forces. And the goal is to support and safeguard some kind of persistence of the Egyptian forces into the national economy. This stands in opposition to the demand that still comes from the Western Bloc, principally the IMF, the World Bank, to minimize, to marginalize the presence of the state from the economy. There's been a clear attempt, a clear request of withdrawing the presence of the army or the state from the economy. So this idea of supporting Egypt in this sense, through agriculture, free trade, is indirectly supporting also the infrastructure architecture of Egypt in the way that armed forces will be safeguarded in the economic sector. And this will add on some forms of substructural stability of the Egyptian status quo. And this is the goal behind, trying to avoid the collapse of political authorities, because if Egypt will collapse, it will be probably a chaos for North Africa. And the second thing is there's no alternative. So, or al-Sisi or Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So it's in the interest of all parties to keep the authority where it is because of security on the ground, because of certain dynamics that can be transformed, that can be altered right now in North Africa. And also in the rest of the region, I must say. So please me to also expand to the Levant area, if you don't mind. And the third level is renewables. This is where Russia is investing a huge amount of money in the country. Renewable intersect also the Agenda 2030, intersect the SDGs frameworks. And Russia is supporting the construction of the Daba nuclear power plants in Port Said area. So you can see this a broad ambition to turn the Suez Canal economic zone into a Russian economic hub through usufruct contract. And in the 70s, actually, yeah, it was in the 70s, end of the 60s, actually, 70s, something like that. We entered the nationalizations of Suez Canal area. Now we are actually seeing the selling of the Suez Canal area to great powers, principally Russia and also China, trying to exercise our interests in the Port Said and the Suez Canal economic zones. Of course, there are discourse of stability that it's really intertwined with the economic dimensions here, the trade and business dimensions here I just mentioned. And the last sector I want to mention is the military sector, which is not, of course, something that must be neglected. Egypt is a historical ally of the US. Out of $2.3 billion in terms of foreign assistance, $1.3 billion channeled to the Egyptian forces. So there's still, very strong ties between the US and Egypt. But despite this, Russia is investing, is increasing investments in the exports of conventional arms and weapons towards Egypt, but these exports has been downgraded in the rest of North Africa. So this stands in opposition. So you can see here there's a kind of competition that is happening within Egypt, and this is a tricky game, a tricky position for the country, at least for perspective of Egypt, because on the one hand we have a country still oriented toward the US when it comes to militarism. On the other hand, we have a country that is trying to open up to Russia and China, and through this open up, Russia and China, I suspect that will control the North African markets, and then we open up to the Mediterranean area as well. All this is not politically risky, and there's a political meaning for this. The political meaning is that we are witnessing a kind of attempt to come back to a kind of reappropriations of the idea or the concept of economic statalism, which stands in opposition to the Western Bloc demands of expanding and emphasizing neoliberalism and privatizations of the markets, something that right now is not really finding its own dimension in North Africa, something that goes beyond Egypt. That's something that also applies, is attached to other countries in the region. I could mention probably also Tunisia or, of course, Algeria, if you don't mind. Please me also expand to these two countries, if you agree with me. And then the social dimension, something we neglected so far. Russia and China are trying to fill the void that the US didn't manage to fill, and they feel to also include the European Union as a middle power in this game of rebalancing. And the meaning here is that the Western idea, the US-backed idea of democracy and democratization failed the Middle East, failed society and societies in the entire Middle East over the past 2-3 decades or so. And therefore, this opened up to the non-Western bloc, at least in North African escapes, as opposed to the Levant, how the Levant is now unfolding in terms of crisis, in terms of its equilibrium, in terms of new equilibria that are emerging. And we will see in the next years, months, how the situation will evolve. Comes with political meaning, I'm wrapping up, comes with political meaning as that it's not democracy that doesn't work in the region, but it's how the West failed the region and how the non-Western bloc is trying to fill also politically the void, also in terms of ideologies and economic model that the West failed to export. Exportations, impositions, neocolonialism doesn't work, never worked, and will not work in the region. And that's all for me.
Dr. Maria, here's another question about your research. To what extent do global narratives such as environmental politics and climate diplomacy overshare the platform for cooperation in the Middle East? Or do they remain filtered through national security, lenses?
Well, this is a good question, to be honest. It's based on what I'm currently doing as part of my research and research projects and grants, which I'm leading as SOAS. When you look at nature, you look at the environments, you can see here there's an attempt of institutionalizing, weaponizing nature as a new locus of political power. When I refer to the environment and nature, specifically referring to the fact that there's a kind of opportunism, opportunistic logics in how the environmental politics are trying to mitigate interest in trying to mitigate regional realism that applies in the region. I'm not arguing, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I don't want to be optimistic sometimes, or at least too much optimistic sometimes. Nature and environment, I'm trying to foster some forms of intra-countries and regional dynamics of cooperations. If you look at GCC countries, how they're trying to explore the model of environmentalism in North Africa, other countries. In the region, it could be okay, but at the same time, there's some sort of attempt of securitizing, not as much the idea of the nations, that is something that has collapsed in the area. We have so many states, but we have so many fragmented nations. If you look at, I remind of Anthony Smith, the idea of myths, memory symbols, how they used to play in the past to force the idea of nations, how now memories have been abandoned. We are now witnessing a kind of attempt of modernizing memories through the myth of the SDGs and then create new identities in the area. So it's attempts of actually monopolizing the idea of the natural environment and national security is no longer there because, as I said, we have fragmented nations. But an attempt of securitizing through nature, through the environment, through the interest that nature brings with it, the infrastructures, the political infrastructures of states. At the moment, most of them are very brittle. When I say brittle, I'm clearly making the point that they look stable from the side, but they're very unstable from the within. So corporations is supporting, I want to reframe this, sorry. Nature is supporting some opportunistic logics in the region. It's fostering cooperation to some extent, but at the same time is also securitizing infrastructures of power and how they are trying to persist and perpetuate in the entire region despite challenges. This doesn't come in support of society, and ecology should be prioritized. And also, if you look at ecocides, conflict in the ecocides in the region is also perpetrated by Israel. Let me be straight on this. Also, the ecocides that Israel just committed in Iran in targeted nuclear sites could be considered with international law as an ecocide, if you want it or not, just a legal premises. Then there's no political discourse. It's a legal, a legal attempt of conceptualizing what's going on in the area. And yes, I want to wrap up here.
Thank you, Dr. Maria, for connecting the regional and the global, reminding us that no regional dynamics occurs in the vacuum. Thank you to all our panelists for a truly fascinating and comprehensive discussion. Now we would like to open the floor to our audience. Any questions, comments, supplements, exchanges? Okay. Where's the microphone?
Mike?
Where's the mic? Okay.
For the live stream, I think you need microphone.
Mike is better.
It's not. I think it's a TV microphone. It doesn't work.
First of all, this is Yücel Bulut from Karadeniz Technical University. First of all, thank you very much for your all words, all things. My question is that, considering the not de-escalating issues between Iran and Israel, what will be the further issues for within the Iran, especially when it's come to the possibilities of insurgencies, if there is any? What will be the consequences for Turkey? Because we have seen in Syria that for the regional balance, Turkey is like a protector for many reasons, maybe. But what will be the Iran's position to stop those kind of insurgencies, if any happens, and what will be the Turkey's position? And my question is to whoever want to answer that question.
About Turkey, I mean, Kemal Bey,
No, I'm not expert on these
Okay.
issues. Yes.
I mean, you mean the insurgency, you mean the PJAK or kind of terrorist organization within Iran? Or?
No, not really. If they get against the regime, if the people, because Israel is trying to do that, they try to initiate an issue for that. But if it's happened within the people, and if they get afraid, the people get afraid, and they flee from Iran and come to Turkey.
I think there are a number of priorities, security priorities for Turkey. Number one is, of course, security and the sudden collapse of the regime in Iran, which I don't like most likely. I don't think most likely at this stage, as Professor Temel Kotil mentioned and other speakers have rightly mentioned. But the security is, I think, number one priority for Turkey in terms of the potential insurgency from the side of PJAK. Because when we look at their patterns, behavioral patterns, they are really supportive of Israel aggression against Iran, and they are trying to find an opportunity to reestablish the military maneuver and mobilization of PJAK. And under this condition, I think the most likely, Turkish position is to target the PJAK in Iranian sites. Of course, we are talking about scenarios. I'm not talking about the official thinking of Turkish state, but it's going to be most likely position of Turkey. It's going to be a military position because of the lack of air superiority in Iran, because of the lack of air domination in Iran. It will be easy for Turkey to maneuver against the PJAK. And the second one, in terms of the security priority, of course, might emanate from the potential mass human mobilization towards Turkey, especially from the north and northwestern Iran towards Turkey. And the number one priority in this context is to establish a sort of safe zone in Iraq to, host the refugee inside Iran rather than accepting them inside Turkey. And of course, there might be sort of strategic ramifications of potential regime collapse in Iran, which Turkey, of course, will not be happy about to see this.
Can I comment, please?
Please.
Well, Israel has changed its own reason for the war. They were talking about destroying the nuclear program, the nuclear weapon, and then the nuclear sites, and then the ballistic missiles, and then regime change. Regime change, one of the major components, is basically creating a wider gap between people and the government. In 2004, when the United States invaded Iraq, CIA sent few groups of their own people to Baluchistan, to Kurdistan, to Ahwaz, assuming that this will help them to complete their mission after Iraq and then basically ending the regime in Iran. And at that time, if you go back to the newspapers, there were hundreds of articles says, who's next, Iraq or Syria? The reports came, which published in the New York Times, said that the outcome of all of these missions was that people that are not ready to basically revolt against the regime. They hate the regime, but they don't want to work with any foreigner government. Why I'm saying this? Because if you apply this on Iraq's situation, when Saddam Hussein was defeated in 1991, the United States does not have, at that time, alternative. So what they did, they left the government weak, fragile, non-fly zone, sanctions, and worked 11 years to create the alternative.
They failed.
And the alternative, we saw it. So that was the strategy. That's the strategy I see they are following it. I think they may not be able to push people to, or find the bulk of people who can revolt against the regime, but they may work on that for the future. Thank you.
I can add something else, just for your information really. It's based on my analysis so far, regime change is not one option. It's not among the options so far. Because after the failure of 2003 in Iraq, Americans are going to be very reluctant to do any regime change because always it failed. They didn't get any benefit of regime change because they were thinking, okay, based on my experience, the American, they lost the war and they won the battle in Iraq. But the loss has been lost. The war has been lost by them. But there are Iranians in Iran, by the way, not like Iraq. You have Kurds in Iraq, Turkmens in Iraq, Shias in Iraq, Sunnis in Iraq. The less minority in Iraq are Iraqis. In Iran, this concept is not true. Even the Kurds in Iran, they say that I'm Iranian Kurd. Kurd in all other parts of, in all the area, they are very reluctant to say I'm Iraqi Kurd. They will call Kurd Iraqi. Okay? They have Iranian in Iran. And always from 2,700 years, always changes in Iran came within Iran. They are not ready to deal with outsiders. They are not happy with the regime. This is correct. But I never ever think any machinery or any proxy of American can work inside Iran to change the regime. No matter what they do, it's very hard. It's one of the options, but so far I've never ever heard, because everybody, they're very reluctant, even Netanyahu. When he talks about that, he knows what's behind it, because they know there are Iranians in Iran, not like any other else, and any other countries in the Middle East, by the way. Thank you.
Professor, another question? Sergio? The last question, please.
No.
Last question. We have flights this afternoon.
No one.
My question would be to Professor Mohammed Ihsan about the Kurdish politics, because recently Turkey and PKK had also new certain type of relationship. So it's really hard to define because of the previous experiences. And also there are different groups within the PKK as well. So here in Turkey, it looks like disarmament process is going well. But at the same time, there are also certain powers in Syria, the Kurdish side, who has a good relation with Israel and the United States. And how do you read that process? Would this process be more prosperous, peaceful for the Kurdish people all over the Middle East, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, or what would be?
I've been following that issue a lot, and in Washington I've been asked always about this case. A lot of times, million times, I think. All of us, I think, the majority of us, we never ever agree that there is bad war or bad peace or good war. Always with a peace. But peace started how it starts. It was great that Turkey as a state told them, let us get rid of your weapons, calm down, we'll stop war, at least temporarily. Öcalan be out or Öcalan didn't be out, I think that's not an issue, based on my experience. But always peace is ping pong. You should think about after that what should happen. I worked in South Africa before the Mandela, and I was aware of what's going on, how they were dealing. In 1991, if we were asking any guy, Mandela will be out of the jail, I think no one can believe that one. I am older than all of you, I think. My shape is okay, but I think I'm older in age. I've been there. I think Turkey as a state should get advantage of these peoples. They are headache for Iraq, headache for Kurds, headache for Iran, headache for American, headache for everybody, seriously. But that's be too hard what you should do after that. They get rid of it, you should be very careful how you're going to contain them, what they're going to do after that. It's not easy. You have a lot of people, they become a real fighter, real killers. You should have a plan for that. In South Africa, we fated in 1996, the majority of the people are national Kurds people who were their fighters who became part of the government. Within themselves, they started to create gangs, drugs, crimes, so hard to contain them and to manage them. I think Turkey as a state should have a clear plan what I should do after that. Integrate them with the political system, let them establish parties, get other political, and this issue shouldn't be part of this agreement about Turkish political party. Okay, JHP, they hate AKP, that's their right, but never ever use this issue. And in general, keep the PKK issue away from Kurdish issue. You have Kurds in Turkey, they are not happy. This is clear. No, it's not my word. You have to think and never ever think, because Israelis want to get advantage of this issue. Seriously. Israel, they want to get advantage of this issue to create an excuses to use them against Turkey as a state, because they don't forget the political and social memory in Israelis' political mind is not like any one of us, by the way. All of us, we are ready to forgive and ready to forget. But they are not ready to forgive and not ready to forget. Never forget that. Never, never, never forget that piece. I think it needs a national plan, and you can get advantage of what Saddam Hussein did in 1974, and then both sides committed mistakes, the war started again in Kurdistan, in Iraqi Kurdistan, by the way. Really. We should get advantage of mistakes. Assad did it in 2011 with what happened in Syria. If he was containing them at that time in correct way, no one had the right to use them against Turkey as a state. It's a time of mind, calmness, long-term plan, and putting the interest of Turkey as a state as a top priority for you. Not party's interest, not personal interest. We should think in that way to have peace and stability in the area. This is my analysis for that.
Thank you. Time is up. Thank you to our 5 distinguished speakers for their sharing, expertise, and insightful perspective. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much
for your attending.
By the way, we have a lunch at Kennedy Lodge. You are more than welcome.